Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I just have a quick request of you before Roger starts his lecture, and that is if you are using a tablet or a laptop, to please turn it onto low light. And if you are taking photographs, please turn your flashes off. Both are distracting to your colleagues, so we would appreciate it if you could do that. Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. It's good to see a good crowd, even on a Friday night when you should be doing much better things than this. But it's heartening to see that there are enough rock hounds and fossil fans out there to come back for this. We're going to now go from the Permian to the recent in 45 to 50 minutes. It's going to be a rush. Please, if you want to slow me down, please just tell me to slow down, and I will do that. But I'm going to try and get you through all of this in the time allotted. Permian to recent, that's really now from 252, the end Permian mass extinction, from 280 million years, the beginning of the Permian period, through to today, and concentrating on the Western Cape. Is another sort of a picture of that stack of rocks that I was showing you yesterday. We just got now colored in, but we're really going to start here now where we left off yesterday at the base of the Karoo supergroup. This is this lot from here up to here, and it's split up into three groups. The Karoo supergroup is split into the Dwika, the Eka, and the Beaufort group in our part of the country. Further north, we'll have another group on top of there, the Stormberg group, but we are not going to be able to experience that in our part of South Africa. It's only confined to the Free State and Lesotho. Let's go to the back to our continental drift story. This is what you have to keep in mind all the time that we are looking at these rocks, to position these rocks within the continental disposition of the time. And we're going to start now at 300 million years with the, as I mentioned yesterday, a time when Gondwana had migrated over the poles. And when a large landmass migrates over the pole, then very often it promotes the expansion of ice much further away from the pole than it would be if it was just open ocean over the pole. And there it commonly then triggers what we would call a glaciation, an ice advance over pretty much the entire southern continent at this time, the entire Gondwanan continent at 300 million years. And we'll look at some of the evidence for that and as the ice melts, we'll move into this sort of 250 period when the Karoo Basin was moving a little bit further away from the pole, getting much more easily, much more ameliorable climate, much better habitats for the animals and plants at that time, and we'll be introduced to the therapsids, or the mammal-like reptiles, which makes South African Karoo Basin famous for its fossil beds, fossil occurrences of mammal-like reptiles. So let's start that. We'll continue on to around 200 or 250 million years before we have to move away from the Karoo Basin. Again, still in a Gondwanan setting. We haven't yet got to the point of breaking up. Breakup only really started to get going around 150 million years ago, and by about 110 million years, we had a single continent on its own. It's the first time we have Africa as such, only 110 million years ago. And from then, from the point at which all the other continents had drifted off Africa, then the rivers of Africa began to flow out to its new coastline. And that river flowing out to its new coastline, and Africa as a continent generally rebounding or coming back out of the mantle unloaded of all this stuff around it, then has undergone pretty much erosion ever since then. That's why we're not so good. We haven't got such large deposits of post-Gondwanan sediments except around our new coastline. So to go for younger rocks, we then have to go around the coastlines of South Africa to get good evidence of what was happening during the 50 to recent period. And we'll look at that on the west coast. Remember this subduction that was taking place out there. This is, let's say, the Paleo-Pacific plate coming into the edge of Gondwana, the southern edge of Gondwana, and there was the pushing down or subduction or sucking down, pulling down of the crust, remelting, and a lot of folding and faulting going on here. And that's manifested today as our Cape Fold Mountains. We live right next to the Cape Fold Mountains right now, and we are very much influenced by this mountain range, which at this time we would have called the Gondwanides. This is a single mountain chain caused by the subduction of the crust under here, this subduction here, crushing and compressing and folding and faulting and thrusting and duplicating the rock layers to such an extent in this area that they stacked up so high that they started to sink down into the mantle, creating a depression around the area of loading here. And that depression, especially this one here on the landward side, on the continental side, is known as the Karoo Basin. And it's in there that the rivers were flowing and the sediments were accumulating and burying the animals and plants which has created our fantastic fossil wealth in that area, and that's what we're going to be looking at. But let's have a look first at that tectonic belt. This is known as an orogenic belt, and this is the evidence of that constant compression of the Cape Fold Mountains. It started around 260 million years ago and finished by 200 million years ago. But it's about 60 million years of compression, uplift, and thrusting, which created these beautiful fold structures that you see in Meringsport Pass or Swartberg Pass, or even here, right next to the N1 as you go into Laingsburg. On the left-hand side of the road, look at that beautiful fold there, and this is a very good example of that tectonic style. When on a satellite image, of course, you can see these ridges of mountains, the Swartberg and the Outeniqua Mountains, and the Oudtshoorn Valley in between, these big thrusted belts. We're going to be looking at mostly of these sites now of the marked yellow on this map, and we'll start off at the base of the Karoo supergroup at the Dwika glaciation. This is a view at the time looking at that Gondwanide belt, and just to show you that there was depressions all the way along the landward side of the Gondwanide belt, and it's in these depressions that Karoo rocks have been accumulated and are still there today. Of course, these continents are now all drifted apart, but my job is to go to all these basins. It's a fantastic job, just to go to them, find fossils, look at the rocks, and see the similarities and the differences between these basins in terms of their rock succession, their paleoclimates, and their paleoecosystems. And that's what my big project is called, the paleoecology of Gondwana. So that's why I have to go to all these places. And in fact, on the 1st of March, I'm going up into northeast Brazil, up into this lot, and in April, May, in June I'll be in Tanzania, and then over to Namibia. So even this year I'm doing the rounds of Gondwana. And of course you have to go to different terrains today, whereas they were much closer, all these basins in Gondwana times. Today you have to go through these different types of environments to get to those rocks, which is quite exciting. Let's look at our main Karoo Basin again. In a plan view, this is 2/3 of our land surface are covered by these rocks, starting at 300 million years with the glacial deposits, and then getting drier and warmer until we get desert-type deposits up here at the 200 million year. And then the basaltic lavas. These purple is the evidence of the breakup of Gondwana. As the continent started to break up, then lots of lava coming up through stretch marks in the crust, and those eruptive volcanoes are still evident here, forming the highlands of Lesotho. In cross-section, which is of course another way that geologists are always looking at this, our Karoo, there's the Cape orogenic belt. Cape Town is on the other side of these. And there's the deepest part of the Karoo Basin, or what they call a foreland basin, is closest to the mountains, and it gets shallower and shallower as we go north. So you can see that the thickest rocks are closer to the mountains. And we get our best resolution of what was going on year by year, millennia by millennia, and in the southern part of the basin, where there are more layers of rocks being laid down here than in the northern part. That's why I concentrate my work in the southern part. Just as by way of a sort of summary of what was going on from this glacial period, we have the ice melting around 300 million years. The ice melted, and by 280 we were starting to get deltas building out from the Gondwana ice into this sag basin in the Karoo Basin, filling in the meltwater lake here, filling in the lake from the edges, forming a new land area around the edges here. And it's this land area in the Beaufort group that was colonized by the therapsids, the mammal-like reptiles, amongst other things. And this, we'll be looking at that. And as the land area prograded or got wider and wider, the central lake got less and less until it dried up altogether and just became a desert, a pure sand desert, like a Namib-type desert, where big sand dunes capped the whole lot. And these are the evidence for this desert is the Golden Gate National Park, those big sand cliffs at that point. We're not going to go there, but it's just to show you there's been a lot of changing climates, changing environments in our Karoo Basin between 300 and 200 million years. And of course that would have had a tremendous effect on the animals and plants that live there. The glacial, we had a look at glacial deposits yesterday. We were looking at submarine glaciers yesterday, and we're still dealing with an ice shelf dropping the material out into a standing water body in our part of this Dwika glaciation. If you go up to Kimberley, for instance, you'll be able to see what was like up here where the rocks were being scratched and striated by the glaciers. But if you come down to Maikisfontein, which is where I'll tell you now, this is where you were sitting. So Maikisfontein was here 300 million years ago. And the rocks that it was deposited down under the sea there look like this. They look like tombstones. In fact, this is commonly known as tombstone weathering. This is a glacial deposit. The old name for it would be tillite. The new name for it is a diamictite. A diamictite because it's basically made up of two classed sizes, a fine-grained rock flour and lumps. And these lumps, of course, are the blocks of rock that the glacier had plucked away from the valley side, carried down into the open sea, and then deposited on the seabed or dropped onto the seabed. A good place to look at this, and a pleasant place, is at the Wauchope General Wauchope War Memorial there at Maikisfontein. Just before you get to Maikisfontein on the right-hand side of the road, you can turn in here, park and have a look at the memorial, and also study the striated pebbles and blocks in the Dwika diamictite right there. 300-million-year-old deposits. If you chance going out onto the road, the memorial is down behind here, but if you chance walking along the road, then you see a much cleaner cut of the diamictite with these big blocks of strange types of rocks, all different types of rocks. So you can see from looking at the rocks where the glaciers were moving from, and of course you can do lots of provenance studies by just trying to reposition these blocks back into their parent bodies. Most of them come from the north to the south, but they have found a few blocks of rock that are only found in Antarctica, so there were some glaciers coming from the Antarctic side as well. There are striated pavements near Kimberley. This is outside the Western Cape, but this is what the striated pavement looks like. These are the marks of the Dwika glaciers that were moving over the Kimberley area at that time. And you can see this at the place called Nooitgedacht. There you can go and visit this glacial pavement, they call it, or iceberg tracks. But they have been originally, not by vandals, they have originally been, the patina has been penetrated by sand etchings, and also has an archaeological interest. A nice place to look at the post-glacial meltout now. We're looking now just after the glaciation. We haven't got far fewer blocks in here, but there's still this fine rock flour with these big drop stones in it. And a good place to look at this is just behind Lainsburg, the Wittbergs River. You can actually walk along the river, it's a dry riverbed, and walk along this succession out of the Tillite into the meltwater area. The Prince Albert Shale is known officially, but it's a great place to see beautiful drop stones. Walking a bit further in Wittbergs River, you walk from the drop stones into these sort of beds here, where you've got these sharp-topped, sharp-bottomed beds. You've seen these before in the Malmesbury group, and again repeated the same things. These are turbidites, again deposited offshore in the sort of in the bottom of this shallow lake area, with at the toe of these deltas coming into the lake, and turbidite deposits coming off and depositing those very self-same ripples forms that we saw in the Malmesbury group yesterday, again in the what is known as the Lainsburg Formation, and you can see that just outside Lainsburg. Any of those well-bedded rocks that you look at. And if you look more closely at these well-bedded turbidite rocks, you'll start to see ash beds in between, and those ash beds have been dated, radiometrically dated, at 280 million years. Yeah, 280 million years, the Collingham Formation. So as we walk a bit further up the turbidite layers, you get to a very distinctive grey layer, and you'll see this as you drive all the way between Mykesfontein and Lainsburg. On both sides of the N1, you'll see this distinctive grey layer, and above it is this very sharp and very continuous white bed. The grey layer is known as the Whitehill Formation, and that white bed, which you can't miss, is known as the Mykesfontein Chert marker. The grey layer is really the weathering. It weathers white, but it is a black shale, organic, rich shale, and it is actually the source rock for all the shale gas that is being talked about and drilled so much these days. But in the Karoo Basin, this is one of the big source rocks for the hydrocarbons and the gas which they're looking for. But this marker here is an ash bed. It's a very distinctive volcanic layer of volcanic ash, which has become preferentially silicified because of all the volcanic glass in it. So that has also been dated, and it's also been provenance. It's been they've done geochemistry on it, and the geochemical trace from source to where it is now shows that this came from the Peruvian area of South America. So this ash bed actually was from a volcano in what Peru is today. But of course, that Peruvian area was much, much closer to here at that time. But that's been sourced to there. In the Whitehill Formation, if you go and look into these white shales, you will find our very first good body fossils you can find fishes in the echoturbidites, but really good body fossils of Mesosaurus. Now, this was a very classic proof of continental drift. A great South African paleontologist, Alexander du Toit, was the first to write to prove the wandering continents, not just by the fit of the continents, but the fact that you've got fossils in South America and in Africa and in India that resembled each other so greatly that they could not have been formed independently. They had to have been joined. And this is Mesosaurus, one of the fossils that du Toit used to prove that continental drift was in fact a phenomena, had taken place, and was no longer a theory. He wrote the beautiful book, The Wandering Continents. It's still a classic. In the Whitehill Formation, which is a very large lake, it's a shallow lake deposit with evaporite or with precipitated mineral calcium carbonate in it, with these dark shales. But in these big lumps in there, they don't look like much, but actually they are algal bioherms. So they are algal forms. They're basically like layer upon layer of slimy algae which built up into like a reef, or what we call a bioherm. So that is a very good indication of the sort of the salinity of this. It was quite saline, this water, but these algal bioherms they form in elongate sausages, and the they are elongate along the line of the most. They elongate along the line of the flow, if you like. So the tidal flow was going back and forth like this in this way. So you can almost use the elongation of these nodules to show you which way the tide was going in and out. Another little thing that found in those Whitehill shales is this crustacean called Notocharis. Funnily enough, we don't get much else except a few insects, some plants, some fishes, Notocharis a lot of, and Mesosaurus quite a lot of. So it's a very strange and interesting bed, and there you can walk among it. If you stay at Markiesfontein and just go across the road towards Sutherland, you'll come to this outcrop here. It's quite there's Markiesfontein on the other side there. You'll come to this outcrop, and if you get to this outcrop, just walk around there and over the fence there. The farmer doesn't mind. He's never minded in the past. And you get into the Whitehill on that side. And then you can walk up along into this outcrop here, and this outcrop here has these beautiful trace fossils. That's ancient marks of worms and crustaceans that were living on the bed at this time, and these are the Collingham turbidites coming down, and in between the turbidite, in between the submarine landslide flows, we had colonization of the surfaces with the animals making furrows, feeding on the organic rich muds there. Between those turbidite flows, we have also this green, very greenish colored, very fissile, very powdery claystone, and that is volcanic ash. So there's hundreds of volcanic ash layers at this time. So this was a turbulent time in the early Permian period when the Peruvian volcanoes were going off, the Proto-Andean volcanic belt. what they call the proto-pre-cordillera, was quite volcanically active and spraying a lot of volcanic dust over into our Karoo Basin, where it's deposited at this time. And of course we use that to accurately date the rocks at the same so they're very useful, those volcanic ash layers. This is just a pictogram which was done on site, but it is an easy way to imagine these lobes. So this is what happens when the river comes out, the delta comes in, and all the sediment builds up off the delta in the shallow part of the lake, and then the whole lot slumps. It all at once it slumps, and you get a turbidite flow coming out in. It's all over in 20 minutes time, and as it flows out onto the flat bed of the deeper parts of the lake, it forms these lobes, and each little flow is a pulse, and it forms a lobe, and then suddenly it stops. Everything stops. It's called frictional freezing, and it gives a specific type of sharp bottom, sandy, and then these ripple forms here, and then this these are fining upward cycles formed by this turbidite type flow. Those ripple tops, we saw the ripples in cross-section just now, but that's what those ripples look like on the tops. And you can see this nicely just outside Lanesburg. As you go back out on the hill, climbing out of Lanesburg on the left-hand side, you've got to get there at the right time of the day to see them beautifully picked out. But if you parked and walk along there, you can do that. It's not too bad. You can pick out a lot of details of worm trails and some vegetation, some trees, in fact, are caught up in here as well. Obviously, detrital trees which have been come off the delta down into the water. If you look on the undersides of these beds, that is those flat bottom undersides, they are not just like smooth flat bottoms. They've got these very distinctive slump structures in them, and that's caused by loading. So we get the fining upward cycle of sandstone with sand with mud on top of it, and the next one comes in, and the next one comes in on top of mud. So if you dump sand on top of mud, you get what differential loading. In other words, the mud just can't hold the sand up, so it starts to sink down into it, and that's the classic structure of that. So it already tells you that these layers were put down one after the other quite quickly before the mud had a chance to consolidate and dry out or become hard. Moving further north, moving further past Lanesburg area, past Lanesburg, past Leochamka, you start to approach, on the left-hand side, the Nieuweveld Escarpment. Now we're into the Beaufort group by now. This layer at the bottom here is about 260 million years here, and around here is 255 million years. So in that nice escarpment, then you have got about 5 million years of geological time, and of course you can see that it's made up of sandstones, which is these little smaller ridges here with these thick cliff-forming layers of mudstone in between. The sandstones are ancient river channels, Mississippi-sized river channels, and the mudstones are the evidence of the floodplains on either sides of those river channels. So at this time, the Beaufort, this part, we're now in this area sort of here. These meandering rivers were coming out into this shallow lake, and we are in a sort of a dry floodplain, alluvial plain environment, which was very conducive to animals and plants, quite richly vegetated, and became colonized by the therapsids. I've done lots of work here, so we're going to linger on a bit here, because this to me, very often geologists never get a chance to really get the final bit of evidence which confirms all their interpretation. But if you go up in an aircraft, in fact, or best in a satellite, to look down on that part of the escarpment I just showed you near Fraserburg, there you can actually see the former windings of an exhumed paleo meander belt. This is the ancient river that flowed near Fraserburg 255 million years ago. And it's just exhumed. There's the sort of cliff edge of it. Well, I'll take you down there and have a look at it just now. But from Google Earth and even from aerial photographs, you can see it's a large, very sinuous, meandering system, and this is known as a crevasse splay. It's where there's been a breakout from here, and the flood has flooded out into the floodplain. There are these oxbow lakes. All the details which you would see on the Mississippi River today, you can see in this exhumed meander belt. The scroll bars, these are the accretion ridges which build out this thing called a point bar. I'm sure you all remember your school geography. That's all these names are coming back. So I can give good geomorphological names to this geological feature, and with lots of course you can do lots of work with something like this in terms of determining the depth of flow. These are the flow structures in that sandstone. This is what they look like. Again, this trough cross-bedding, which is the flow was from this side to this side, and we know how deep the sand, it was about 13 meters deep maximum, and it had these, on the top surfaces, remember those horseshoes. We can go and measure all those horseshoe shapes. These are the ripples flowing down that ancient river. And if we follow the ripple, these are the arrows of those ripples. The ripples follow the ancient windings perfectly and tell us which direction that river was flowing, from the southwest towards the northeast in today's orientation. And it wasn't that much different in the past. It was flowing from the Gondwanite mountains down here into the internal Karoo Lake around Kimberley area at that time. 255 million years ago. So obviously it looked like this. There's absolutely no doubt it looked something like this that time, and it was in this sort of environment that these rocks accumulated. Now, if you go now into the floodplain areas, we've been looking mostly in the channels, but if you look in these the vegetated floodplain areas on either side, the first thing we find are these brown weathering nodules, and these are calcium carbonate nodules precipitated in the ancient soils. So they give us an indication now that the groundwater in these areas was fluctuating up and down with seasons as well as with floods. So not only was the rivers breaking their banks and flooding the areas and forming these flood-out layers or crevasse splays, there were also the water was going up and down because it was getting a short, hot summer and a long, wet winter. Short, hot summer, long, wet winter, forming a seasonal type of soil. So there's a nice typical Karoo outcrop. It's capped by the dolerites here. We'll talk about the dolerites just now, but I just want to make sure that you know that this isn't one of the sedimentary rocks. This is an intrusive Jurassic-aged, and it's one of the indications of the breakup of Gondwana. So this was something that came in much later. These are the floodplain mud rocks and the channel sandstones that were depositing this. And if we go and look at this little place here, it's not, from this distance you can't see much, but when you go to that little place, if you were walking there when I was, this is what you'd see sticking out of the floodplain mud rocks. That's the left orbit of a skull sitting out here, and there's some skeleton. From the other side, looking from back here, there's the skeleton, and there's the skull sitting there. Now, if I take that out, just hammering it around, even there's the left orbit and the right orbit, there's the snout, and I'm beginning to get it out now. If I look at the skeleton in close, right there, as I was in the field, I took this as the point of discovery. The skeleton is covered in these very distinctive osteoderms, or basically scutes or scales, but made out of bone, bony scales, osteoderm, bone in the skin. So this is like a bit like a crocodile in the way it had bony armor on, certainly on its back and down its arms, and in fact on its belly as well. So I got that out with plaster of Paris bandages and just bandaged it and brought it back. Georgina here has prepared it now, and there she is drilling it all away with a percussion drill to now make it look like this. She drilled it back and front, top and bottom. It is a very rare type of dwarf pariasaur. This is a reconstruction of a pariasaurus. And it is known as Nanoparia, and it has been to Washington, Seattle, Washington State, to Seattle to be described, and it's been named, and it's come back again. So it's all a good success story, and that's just one of thousands of, in fact, about 2,500 fossils that I've found over my time at the museum. So it's just one of them. There's another one. It's just been coming out of the rock. That's the nostril. There's the left orbit again. That's the beak, the tortoise-like beak, and there's its lower jaw. So that's an animal known as Diectodon. If you get it out, there's a beautiful specimen here with two of them intercurled in each other. And of course, that type of intercurling you cannot get just by accident. That was behaviorally done. These animals curled up together in an underground burrow, and we have very good evidence of their underground burrows as well. So they were using underground burrows probably to regulate their temperatures. They weren't entirely warm-blooded. They weren't warm-blooded at all, in fact. They still had a functional pineal organ. That little hole in the top of the head is its pineal organ, and that is its temperature detector. If you go out to Fraserburgh, this is a great place. I know it's in the Northern Cape, but it's only just in the Northern Cape. So go and ask at the museum there if you can go and visit the Fraserburgh the Gansfontein trackway surface. They will take you out to this place. It's a wonderful experience to walk with the ancient therapsids. I took my friend Diectodon out there. And a film crew, I've done a lot of work on this. I actually uncovered this whole pool. It's an ancient pool, one of these crevasse play surfaces that has been imprinted by the animals over a period of about 10 weeks, 255 million years ago, in the early part of the late Permian period. There are many types of tracks there, but there are these small Diectodon tracks, and there are these large stomping tracks of much larger Dinocephalians coming through here. Sometimes we get it in, they were walking on drier land, and we can get their actual fingerprints. This is Diectodon, by the way. You saw their curled up specimens just now. You saw the animal in the rock. Now we've got really good models of this animal, and the model fits the trackways very nicely. There are much larger ones out there. So you can actually, although I'm trying to stop people actually walking on these tracks, you can walk around here. It's freely to walk out and photograph them. But if you do it, go in the morning, early morning or late evening, you get the best light to get the best effect. Now, the analysis of this trackway, we've done a lot of work on it. It's a Dinocephalian trackway, a five-toed, four-legged animal, and we can reconstruct not just the size and the weight of it from its impression into the sand, but the way in which it was walking and how much sinuosity or flexing there are of the backbone to allow the back foot and the front foot to come so close together. We lately have been doing portable laser scanning of the surface to make a perfect rendition down to, I think it's 1/44th of a millimeter of accuracy. So we have now this digital record, because they are out there, they are weathering away, but we've now got a very good digital record for posterity. This is the type of animal that was making this. Incidentally, you can see this curvature of 4 of the toes, and the 5th toe is sticking out. The curvature, the animal has straight toes. The curvature is imposed by the way in which the animal was walking. So it was laying down its foot onto the sediment in a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it was rotating its foot before the 5th digit went down. So before this digit went down, there was a rotation of the foot in the sediment. Now that's a really good indication that the animal had its elbows out. It was not an upright walker. It was a sprawling gait, and it was going like this. It was swaggering. So that's how we reconstruct. So we can get these animals to move now just by looking at their footprints, studying their footprints. So we get a riverside scene of Diectodon down into its burrows, the footprints, the types of vegetation. We have all evidence for all these types of things. So this is the sort of scenario that I build up for different time slices through the Karoo period and throughout Gondwana. A place I'd like you to go to see, if you can, well, if you will, if you want to. It's a brilliant a place for people who are into sedimentary structures, like I am. But this is a beautiful crevasse splay surface that is on a farm called Putfontein. It's south of Beaufort West. It's on the just off the Beaufort West Meringsport Road, about 40 kilometres south of Beaufort West. The farmer is very accommodating. He's actually put a hole in the fence, a gate in the fence to allow pedestrians in there. You just have to talk to the farmer. But there you will see this paleo surface covered in beautiful types of ripples of very shallow water. These ripples were formed by oscillation of wind on the surface of very shallow water on one of these crevasse splays. So as the flood was just draining away, the water was just sitting around for a little while, and the wind induced these beautiful types of ripple forms. These are called ladder-back ripples, and these are double-crested, sinuous-crested oscillation ripples, if you want all the technical stuff. But I've got a little map of places to go on this surface. So you start at the farmhouse and just walk around here and see all these things, including some nice fossils which I've left there, which you will leave there if you. This you can see and you can handle. This is a Diectodon. I've just left it there where I found it, but you can see its eye and its tusk. It's got Diectodon means two pointed teeth, and that's one of its pointed teeth. So there you are. If you go, if you go to the Karoo National Park, you'll go obviously, and you'll see that this type of stratigraphy is well known, well shown there. But unfortunately, they won't let you walk very far around there. There are some lovely places to see the rocks, but the fossil trail is a good place to start. That's just by the rest camp. And this is something I put on there years and years ago, but it is fossils which were found over here when whilst they were building this. The idea was to have a fossil trail down here, and we found these fossils down in the riverbed here. We started to dig around them and put cases over them, and then the architect said, oh, we can't have people walking across the view, so we had to relocate. We had to relocate them from down here to behind the view. So you go behind there. But anyway, the fossils are in their cases, and this is what it's lots of information about the fossil. This is a big Pariasaurus. That little nanoparia was a dwarf one of this. Is now the adult type of this. This has got these hankistont, these very distinctive clover leaf-shaped teeth of a Pariasaurus. Some petrified wood from the area. This petrified tree trunk here shows very clear seasonal rings. So that's another indication of that seasonality, which we already could see from the soils. It's carried out or reaffirmed with the seasonal growth of the trees, the Glossopteris trees. I couldn't let you get out of the Karoo Basin without touching on my favorite topic, which is mass extinctions. And if you travel a little bit further past Beaufort West, only as far as Graaff-Reinet and a little bit further past that, but you'll be able to get to a point in geological time and in the rock record where you can actually put your finger on the mother of all mass extinctions, the worst biological catastrophe to affect life on Earth ever, and that happened 252 million years ago. And it appears to have been caused by, principally triggered by the volcanic eruptions in the Siberian area of northern Pangaea, but we could still feel the effects around here. I've studied PT bounce sections all the way around here on land, and lots of other people are studying what was happening in the oceans as well. So we're coming to a consensus now of rapid global warming caused by this enormous pile of CO2. Something like 65,000 billion tons of CO2 injected into the atmosphere. But over roughly 100,000 years, you see. So what the thing is that enough to count for the extinction? So we study it over here near Graaff-Reinet, and that's where I'd encourage you to go to Old Wappertsburg Pass. It's not far out of Graaff-Reinet. Go up into the old pass, and you'll go along a track, and you'll be able to stop at a point in the rock succession where these Permian animals, these big Permian dicynodonts, all go extinct. And there's a dead period before we get these new Triassic animals of the survivors of this mass extinction. So there's a sort of pictograph of all the animals who went extinct at that layer, and there's the layer, and there's myself when I first discovered it. That must be a few years ago. But I'm still working now on this part of it. So I've done a lot of work with the causes of the extinction. Drought was the big cause. Drought, extend, prolonged, and continuous drought that caused by rapid global warming, most likely triggered by atmospheric CO2 and methane from the volcanic eruptions in Pangaea. Some of those survivors, of course, are really important because they are the ones that gave rise to the whole new world in the early Triassic from which we are descended. There's plenty of evidence to show that if it had not been for those survivors, mammals would not have evolved. What happened to the animals which were trying to cut through this great Gondwanan drought, some of those reptiles were becoming mammal-like in reaction to these high stress conditions at this point in time. So what I'm saying is if it wasn't for the great Gondwanan drought, we would not have come about. Mammals would not have evolved. And the work that I've been doing lately is looking at the phases of extinction, and now for the next 3 years I'm doing this radiation phase. I'm looking at that in detail. How did the survivors survive, and why? What was it about them that made them able to not only exist but radiate, to actually proliferate, to flourish in such harsh conditions? So if you go up to the top of Wappertsburg Pass, you'll need a 4x4 now. It's a bit rough, but you can walk up there. You get to this lovely outcrop at the top, and in this outcrop I found this specimen. I'll show it to you just now, but there are the burrows. So one of the strategies of these early mammal-like reptiles, this lineage which was on our way to becoming mammals, this is our distant ancestor at 252 million years ago. They were living in these decline burrows, these shallow 35-degree holes into the floodplain in which they took refuge and procreated and had juvenile aggregation. These are two juveniles of Thrinaxodon, that little cynodont mammal-like reptile, lying together in the burrow from that locality, from that very place. That was a film crew from NHK, which is the Nippon TV. This is Japanese TV. They've done a thing on it because they wanted to know what made mammals mammals. How did mammals come about? And we did a whole documentary on that, and they came to do it here. So there's a close-up of that specimen, absolutely brilliant a chance discovery, but it tells us so much more than the fact that this is just two animals lying together in a burrow. They are juveniles of the same brood, almost certainly. They're exactly the same size, shape. You see the sutures on the skulls? Those sutures are in your skull. There is the functional pineal. The pineal still opening. It still needed to know how hot or cold it was outside. Your pineal is no longer functional, but you still have a fontanella. You used to when you were much, much younger. Your fontanella is now that is not quite closed up. So there it is, all evidence that these reptiles were behaving like mammals before they were getting the skeletal adaptations. But even at this stage, there's a certain amount of homeothermy. We haven't put fur on them. We keep them fur, but they do have whiskers. They have whisker pits in their maxilla. So they're getting whiskers because they were living underground and almost certainly nocturnal. So again, one of the strategies to overcome that Gondwana drought was to become insectivorous and to forage at night. And so that was the scenario put forward. Walking with Dinosaurs have taken that up and made a nice, lovely animation of that. I just wanted to put this in quickly because if you're ever going out that way for a couple of days and you are particularly keen on looking at Karoo fossil displays, I've been involved with all of these in the outlying districts of where the idea was to put the fossils back where they came from, to return something back to the communities that have helped me find these fossils. So all of these have fossil displays in it, and you can go and see them at any time. There are a few more, but they're further away, and others which are sort of they're on farmers, and the farmers are reticent to let me talk about them because they don't want to be flooded with visitors. So let's keep them to the ones that that you have to pay to go in and do that. Okay, so we've seen this before. We're now getting much closer to the beginning of the breakup of Gondwana. So we've gone through the 252 million period. About 200 million years ago, we start to get the evidence now that the continents were now pulling apart. No longer were they being pushed together by that subduction. They were now beginning to pull apart because of a great mantle plume which had built up in the center of the southern part of Gondwana and was pushing it apart. And that's when we start to get volcanic intrusions through all these sedimentary layers that we've been looking at. And we can see those, of course, I pointed out earlier, the dolerites. These are those volcanic intrusions, 180 million years old, that have been pushed into the 256 strata, and this volcanic rock is now cooled, and very cool. It has this very distinctive columnar structure, and that's very common in volcanic rocks that have cooled relatively slowly, and they contract then into a hexagonal or polygonal structure into these columns. You don't have to go all the way to the Karoo to actually see the Jurassic volcanics. Go down to Smithwinkle Bay and turn left when you get to the beach, and just over the rocks, just over this first little outcrop, you'll get into some Cape granites. But there the granites have been intruded by one of these Jurassic dikes. So you can get the feeling of the breakup of Gondwana even at Smithwinkle Bay. If you look at that, there's a lovely cutting across, but if you go and you can actually put your finger right down on that contact. This is 180 million years. There's 550 million years. You can put your finger on it, or you can put one foot on either side and see if you can feel it. At the same time, at the breakup, soon after the breakup, there was South Africa passed over a hotspot, one of these plumes that I was talking about yesterday. And one of the effects of South Africa, like passing over this plume, was to create a series of string of volcanoes through the thickest part of the crust. And as the crust got thicker and thicker, the volcanoes were sourced from deeper and deeper in the mantle until it started to get to a point where graphite had been turned into diamond, and diamonds were now being transported to surface through our crust as it passed over this hotspot. And of course, that's the reason for South Africa's diamond wealth, the kimberlite pipes. Now, that's a typical kimberlite pipe which has brought diamonds to surface. This is basically a explosive volcanic eruption. But at the top, in the crater, very often in the crater, after the extinction of the volcano, after it became dormant, there was a lake formed in that hole. And we have been able to get down into the sediments that were formed in those lakes through the efforts of De Beers mainly, who have been digging into these things to get the diamonds out and drilling into them. And I just want to show you if you go out to Bushmanland area and go to one of these pans, you can see where a Cretaceous crater lake used to be. But I just want to show you that that's the De Beers drill going down into this place called Stompoor out there near Kenhardt. And in that core, a fossil frog like this occurred. So that's a Cretaceous, 70 million year old fossil frog, and the fishes also came out of the core. The fossil frog is known as Volcanobatrachus, volcano frog, Mandeli. So there's a very good effort to source some research funds, which came to naught. This is much more successful one. This one is called Stompouria after the farm, Roger Smith Eye after the farm. Much more satisfying. Look at the preservation of the caudal fin of that fish. The scales are still there. The fin rays are all there. The color mottling, the color patterns. See, the scales are still there. And not only that, the patches, these are the color mottling. So it's like a stickleback type fish. It's actually a garfish, a fossil garfish, which is a predatory carnivorous fish, and color spots and scales. Beautiful preservation. Lots of work can be done on these. It's full of that down there. I had National Geographic funded an excavation in there. We got down 12 meters, and we've got 240 frogs, all fully articulated, and tadpoles as well. These are the slabs coming out of, and this is a National Geographic photographer, of course. You can see by the fisheye lens and all that. But there's some of the fantastic frogs that we've got out. And right at the very end, this thing came out, which it was actually ended up on the heaps. Nobody recognized it. I looked at it and I saw pattern in it. Anything with pattern in it, of course, has to be interesting. I put silicon rubber into that hole, cleaned it out, put the silicon rubber into the old hole, then took it out again, and there it is. A string of caudal vertebrae of an ornithopod dinosaur. So that's brilliant stuff, because we've got the fishes, frogs, we've got tadpoles, gastropods, mollusks, ostracods, but now the vertebrate stuff. We had a dinosaur, just to add a little bit more flavor and to try and source some more research funds. So the artist will now put, this is what it's like an iguanodon type of animal, which is living in those crater lakes in Bushmanland area, with the Xenopoides type of fish, aquatic frogs, the fish, turtles, and we did not find that. We were looking for it. This is why we put it in there for National Geographic's benefit, but we haven't found it yet. We want to know what mammals were looking like in the center of South Africa at this time, because remember, this was a time of erosion. Everything is being eroded. We've got no deposits, no good any evidence of what the animals and plants were like in the center of South Africa in the Cretaceous period, except for these little tiny pockets. Another little pocket to look at the kimberlite itself is Meltonwald. It's a little bit, again, out of Western Cape, but not far. Go to Meltonwald Guest Farm. It's a great place to spend a weekend. You can see fossils, which also I put in there. We take the friends of the museum there quite regularly. In fact, we're going there this year in October. We're spending a week here looking at fossils. And at this kimberlite pipe, there's it's way off craton, as they say. It's on the thinnest part of the crust, so they haven't got any diamonds in it because it wasn't sourced deep enough, but it has got garnets. So you can go there and see these beautiful garnets and ilmenites and these sort of eclogites. These are bits of really, really old rock which are never found on surface. They all come up in volcanoes. So again, really interesting for mineralogists to study. Coming now from the 70 million year, we're going to come up onto our coastal plains. Since breakup, we have this build-up of coastal plains all the way around South Africa, and really they are sort of 5 million years and younger, the deposits. And of West Coast Fossil Park, of course, is a great place to see what life was like at about this period in the evolution of hominids. But we've got a very good selection of the associated fauna. We have no hominid fossils there, but we have the fauna and the flora, in fact, of what life was like in this part of South Africa at the dawn of humankind, at the time when the first human-like apes had evolved. We have evidence of them further up in Africa in the Rift Valleys, but we've got all the associated animals and plants down here in the West Coast Fossil Park. So that's where it is, close to Longabong Lagoon. And this, incidentally, is the modern Berg River. But we have very good evidence that 5 million years ago it came out through here. So we're looking at the fossil Berg River, and it's a very similar sort of meandering style as it is today. It's just had a river capture there. And there are reasons for that river capture. It's to do with tectonic warping, the land surface actually rising up and warping along an arch in this area here. So the fossil park is situated there, and this is what it looks like when you sort of look over it. It is the old phosphate mine, Samancor phosphate mine, taken over by BHP Billiton, and BHP Billiton has seeded the money to get us going here. And I went and did an excavation there to start the fossil park. The fossil park at that time, it was when the fossils were being laid down, was here, and there is there's the ancient shoreline at that time. So it was very close to the sea. It was almost within, you could almost hear the sea on a stormy day. You would hear the waves from the point at which you were in this estuarine part of the ancient Berg River. And the fossil deposit is right up here on the northern edge of the ancient Berg River estuary. There's a pictogram of what it was like coming inland out through to the sea. Table Mountains would be visible. These are all upland areas which are still today uplands, and there were highlands at that time. And we were looking at a fossil deposit which accumulated in this position here in that ancient estuary, and this is a reconstruction of what it looked like down there at the time the fossils were being accumulated with all the 5 million year old types of animals and plants. Today, it's, as I say, it was discovered when they were mining phosphate here, and this is the main dig site. This is the discovery site by Dr. Brett Hendy way back in 1976. But I've reopened his excavations, and it's close by, but in a different place, and have now uncovered 75 square meters of bone upon bone upon bone predominantly of the Cebotherium, which is the ancestral giraffe, a long-horned, short-necked, long-horned giraffe. There's his lower jaw, by the way. That's the lower jaw with its teeth. Still beautifully preserved, slightly cracked, slightly trampled by gomphotheres and cebotheres, but otherwise perfectly preserved. The teeth and enamel is still intact, although it's purely, it's no carbon left in it at all. It's completely fossilized. But the ridges in the enamel, we can look at not just the dental health of these animals, but we can look at the isotopes in the calcium phosphate of the enamel, calcium fluorapatites, right? The calcium fluorapatite of the enamel, and that tells us whether these animals were suffering before they became extinct, whether they were eating their best, most ideal foodstuffs. And what we're seeing that the cebotheres were under stress, they were showing signs of hyperplasia, and they were clearly having difficulty in finding their best food. The place was drying out. We were beginning to get the beginning of feinbos flora in this area, taking over from a subtropical type of vegetation. Skull upon skull, there's the horns of the cebothere, the horn cores of the cebothere, and there's some of that very pneumatic bone inside its skull, very similar to giraffes today. Some of the there's seal remains there, beautiful seal remains that show we were very close to the sea, and somehow we have seals mixed up with giraffes, mixed up with hippos, mixed up with birds, mixed up with mice, all in one sort of clump, if you like. And my job as a taphonomist, that's a person who reconstructs the depositional history of fossil deposits, has to reconstruct how we got these whale vertebrae. There's a cebothere horn core, and right here is a beautiful hippopotamus jaw with hippopotamus teeth. So it is, and these are two vertebrae from the same animal, but just separated. So that the animal, the actual whale, must have been here and has just fallen apart in this vicinity to get the association like this. Very fascinating. There's the hippopotamus teeth. They're fascinating, but all amongst them there are all these microfauna, little fishes and amphibians and reptiles, lots and lots of shrews and moles and things like that. Lots of them. The bird, obviously, bird scats or bird regurgitates were probably the source of much of this, but there are there are millions of fossil frog bones, and a lot of these are frog bones. And Thalassa Matthews, my postdoc, now employed by the South African Museum, has already found 5 different species of fossil frogs in this deposit. But the presence of frogs itself tells you that it was not a saltwater deposit. Even so close to the sea, it was still a freshwater deposit, and perhaps these saltwater influxes were cause of much of the death we see around here. Tooth marks in this phalanx, the cebothere phalanx, and there's a definite puncture mark, and on the other side we see the canine puncture marks of hyena. And I've left these in the hole. You can go and see them. You can go and photograph them yourself. There they are. You need a little zoom lens to get this close, but I'm sure if you put it on a tripod, you'll get that as results. The Pippa Paroff, who manages the park, will allow you to walk. You can walk. There are walks all the way around here. You can walk into the high wall here. There's a beautiful cliff section of the dune, which came over into this abandoned river valley and filled the valley. It's a fossil dune, and in the fossil dune, which is only about 1 million years old up here, at that point there, if Pippa will let you up there, you'll be able to see tortoise carapaces, and these trigoniferous, these sort of land snails, hundreds of them up there in the fossil dune deposit. So there's another story to tell, which is only 1 million years old, up in these ancient dunes. Right now, as we speak, it is being a new visitor center has been built. There's the dig site that we were just in. So about 100 meters away is the. In fact, it's 200 meters away is the new visitor center. This is a new museum type place. This is a restaurant, and this is classrooms and that sort of thing. So it's quite a lottery funded exercise, and it's going to be a real improvement to the facilities there at the fossil park. Coming a little earlier in time and a little closer to us, I don't suppose many of you know, maybe you do, of the Saldanha skull. It is now known as Saldanha man. It's basically an archaic Homo sapiens. They thought it was Homo heidelbergensis, but it's basically an archaic modern human, but it still has the brow ridges here. And that was found at Elandsfontein, not far from the West Coast Fossil Park, and dated between 700 and 126,000 years. So we do have some hominid story, but not at the fossil park itself. Another hominid story very close to the fossil park is this the Preekstal there, right next to Langebaan Lagoon. You can go there. Unfortunately, the human footprints there have been removed. They're here they're in the museum where I work, but you can see these fossil dog or fossil hyena footprints close to it. They are, to me, they're actually more fascinating and much better preserved than the human footprints, which this whole site was found by Dr. David Roberts, who unfortunately very sadly passed away a couple of months ago, but he was the finder, and he was the person who studied most these Cenozoic deposits on the west coast. These ancient dune deposits are very well exposed there on the edge of the Langebaan Lagoon, and you can see fossil roots there. I was there when they were casting the what they call Eve's footprints. These are 117,000-year-old hominid footprints, and Dave Roberts found them, and Lee Berger made them famous. But we cast them. We in the museum cast them, and the cast of it is at Hilbeck there in the West Coast National Park. So that's the footprints. They show very nice push-up ridges, actually. So it shows that there was a slope. Where the slope was, it was on wet sand on the bottom of the dune, walking along the edge of the water at that time, and it's up. It's now high up in the ancient dune here. So that's the evidence of the fossil remains of South Africa. All of this is mostly from the cradle of humankind, but we too have this little. Oh, look at that! Just we too have this little contribution to make in our Saldanha skull, which in terms of what they're looking for now, Homo naledi may well be in this area as well. We actually do not know what Naledi's age is, but it suggests that it could well be in this sort of age group as well. An area where we don't have much in the fossil remains. We've got footprints and we've got evidence of working tools, lots of tool evidence, but we don't know what the anatomy of the humans of this time was like at all. So there may be more work on the West Coast, and we could do that. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any pressing questions? Any problems? Yes. The question was, have I seen the footprints at Koh Kama on the coast? That's on the east coast. No, I've seen the Nahoon. Oh, no, I haven't. But I've seen the Nahoon footprints, which are over near East London. They have very nice toe prints as well. But, oh, really? Oh, yes. Okay, yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay, thanks for coming, and good luck out there.